Izzy, and in today's video we're going to be doing my March wrap up. I read 27 books in March despite Animal Crossing coming out, still managed to get some reading done. And yeah, I'm going to try and talk about them as quickly as I possibly can so that we can get through these 27 books without making this video an hour long. We'll see how that goes for us. So without any further ado, let's get started. Also, tell me in the comments down below what your favourite book of March was, or your least favourite book of March, whichever you want to talk about. Let me know down in the comments below. Now let's get started. The first book I finished in March was Honour Among Thieves by Rachel Kane and Anne Aguirre, I think is how you say it. Unfortunately, this was actually a 1-star book for me, so I did not start off March strong with the good books, but this follows a kind of sci-fi world where you can be chosen to be this honour person, and you get to go on these spaceships which are basically sentient and have like feelings and can talk and all this kind of stuff. We just follow a character who gets to go on one of these ships, and it was the most boring thing I have ever read in my life. There's supposed to be this kind of mystery also happening, and there's just like no clues or hints to anything along the way. You literally just get a few boring answers in the last like 5% of the book. It was so long. I think the audiobook was like 12 hours, and honestly that was a waste of those 12 hours. So I don't recommend this book. It sucked. Don't read it. I then read a 5-star book, which was A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I mentioned this in my addictive books recommendation, and so I won't talk about it too in depth here because I could talk about it forever. But it's basically a young adult mystery thriller that follows a girl, Pippa, who for her end of school project has decided to look into an old murder that happened in her town 5 years ago. There was this girl, Andy Bell, who went missing. No one knew what happened to her, but then a few days later her boyfriend committed suicide, but before doing that sent a text confessing to the murder, so the police counted it as a closed case and that was who did it. But Pippa thinks that's incorrect, and it follows her finding out more about the mystery and trying to solve it. And I loved this book so much. It was so good. It was the best mystery thriller I've ever read, hands down, whether young adult, adult. I usually read adult thrillers, but like they did not compare to this book. This book was incredible. There were so many suspects, there were so many reveals and plot twists, and I genuinely did not know who had done it. And like for me, I'm usually a very good guesser. I read way too much Agatha Christie as like a 12-year-old, and it's made me basically a detective in books. So for me to be like truly surprised, then that's incredible. But the greatest thing about it is while I was surprised, it didn't come out of the blue. Like there were clues along the way that made sense once you knew what had happened. You were like, oh, that's why they said that, or whatever. Like, it wasn't just like a, oh, this person you've never met and never heard of is now suddenly the villain. Like, it made sense, and I just loved it so much. If you're looking for a mystery thriller to read this one. It's incredible. Read it. I then read The Truth About Keeping Secrets by Savannah Brown. This is a book that follows a girl after her father has died, and she thinks the death of him was suspicious because he was the town's like psychologist, so she thinks someone was out to get him for some reason. And it's kind of her dealing with all this grief and kind of her unhealthy coping mechanisms, but also there is this kind of mystery about whether it was an accident or not, and it's kind of branded as a thriller, and I think it should be branded more as a book about grief and the impact of grief, because I was kind of going into it expecting a thriller, and I think I gave it 3 stars because I didn't get what I expected. I think if it had been branded different and I knew kind of what the book actually mainly focused on, I would have enjoyed it more. So if you go into this book, don't go into it with a thriller mindset. That's maybe like 20% of the plot maximum. It's mainly a look at grief and the effects of it. I then read We Used to Be Friends by Amy Spalding, which I also gave 3 stars. This follows a story about 2 best friends in their senior year of high school. One of the characters is at the end of the school year and looking back at the year and kind of how the friendship between the 2 of them fell apart, and one point of view is at the start of the senior year, and so they're kind of starting off best friends, but we know because we have the end of the year perspective that their friendship is no longer a thing. So it was quite an interesting concept looking at their friendship after it had dissolved and before it had dissolved, and looking at kind of what led to that. And I just think it was a really interesting look at friendship breakups, which you don't see in books as often. It's usually all about the romance breakups, but I enjoyed it. It just wasn't particularly special or captivating to me. Oh, and I forgot to mention both The Truth About Keeping Secrets and We Used to Be Friends has female rep in both of them. So if you're looking for that, those are books with good rep. The next book I read was Anne's House of Dreams by L.M. Montgomery. This is in publication it was the 4th book, the 4th book, but then she went back and wrote a 4th book, so it made it technically the 5th book, but I just read it as the 4th book even though technically it's the 5th book. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Basically just follows Anne in her adult married life, and while I enjoyed the new setting and the new characters we were introduced to, Anne is just kind of unrecognisable from herself in the original Anne of Green Gables, and so therefore I did not particularly enjoy it, because I love Anne of Green Gables like so much. It's one of my I just love it so much. Also watch Anne with an E on Netflix. Okay, how many times I'm going to mention that? Watch it. But I just felt like it kind of did Anne a disservice, because she was such a free-spirited and individual character, and I love her so much in Anne of Green Gables that it was kind of sad to see her as an adult. Maybe that was just on me. I just shouldn't have read past like the first 2 probably. But yeah, it was like a pleasant enough read, but it did just kind of make me sad. I then read Tweet Cute by Emma Lord, which I gave 4 stars, and this is a book about 2 characters, Pepper and Jack. We get both their perspectives, and Pepper, her parents own a really large burger restaurant franchise and they're like super rich, and Jack's family has a family deli sandwich deli shop. I don't know the American terms for it, but it's a very small business and a family business that's kind of been passed down and is very special to Jack. And one day Pepper's restaurant puts out new like menu items, and one of them is like basically copied from Jack's family store, and so they kind of enter this rivalry between the 2 of them, trying to like protect both of their families like businesses. And yeah, it kind of just follows their hate to friendship to love kind of thing. It was a very sweet book. Usually I find romance a bit boring or cheesy, but I felt like this was relatable and just very enjoyable. And if you're looking for something light-hearted, fun, and just a good time, then I would recommend this book. It was solid. It was a really solid book. I then read The Last Magician by Lisa Maxwell. I gave this book 4 stars. I read this mainly because it's the only thing I've ever heard compared to The Diviners, which is my favourite series of all time. So I was like kind of nervous going into it because I knew nothing could be The Diviners for me, and I was worried I would hate it for that. For the fact that it wasn't The Diviners, but it was a pretty enjoyable book. It follows our main character Esther, who is living in current day New York as a magician, and she can time travel, and she is sent back to 1902, I think it was, to retrieve this book that went missing on this night in 1902 and bring it back to present day to like save magic. And so she has to go back to 1902 and like infiltrate this like gang and try and like pull off this heist basically. And it was super fun. I really enjoyed it. I didn't really connect with the characters, which was my main issue, and I know the character that was my favourite isn't going to be in the second book, so that's a bit disappointing because they were the one I found the most interesting. But apart from not connecting with characters, I loved the plot, I loved the setting. Any kind of fantasy and historical fiction mix is always going to be a win for me. I just love that genre. And this was just really interesting. It was really engaging. It did start off slow, but there was sort of this like slow build of tension, and it was just really, really good book. And I just needed to attach more to the characters to have given it a 5-star, because honestly, like, I just didn't really care about any of them. I was just like, take it or leave it. I then read Yes, No, Maybe So by Becky Albertalli and Aisha Saeed, and this is a YA political romance that follows Jamie and Maya. I gave this book 4 stars, and it follows Jamie and Maya as their state is participating in a special election for the Senate position, I think. See, that's why I didn't get 5 stars, because although I love politics and American politics and I'm fully invested in politics in general, the politics were not explained enough, and I didn't really know what exactly they were campaigning for in the first place, so that kind of took away a little bit of my enjoyment because I was a bit confused. But I did love how much political content was in this book, and I thought it tackled so many discussions really well, because Jamie is Jewish and Maya is Muslim, and they both experience racism and anti-Semitism, and Maya's struggling with whether she wants to date or not, and Jamie is struggling with his confidence and kind of growing up, and they're both just really invested in trying to make a difference and make a change. And I just think it's a really powerful book for teenagers and young people to read, to remind them that you may not feel like you have power, but there are things you can do to change just a little bit of your world. And even if overall it doesn't work out, at least you feel like you've taken back some of that control. And I just think it handles so many discussions really, really well, and it was just a really good book. I then reread An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. This is another one of my favourite series. I read it for the first time this time last year, and I just heard someone talking about it and I was like, oh man, I need to reread that. This is a fantasy series that is sort of Roman Empire inspired, and it follows 2 characters, Laia and Elias, and Laia is trying to save her brother, and in order to do that she has to become a slave to one of the most powerful women in the empire, the commandant, and Elias is the commandant's son, and he's struggling with trying to break free from this military academy, and it's kind of really hard to explain, but it's such a cool fantasy series. It's so exciting, and I love the characters and I love the world, and I give the first book 5 stars. It's my favourite of the 3 that are out so far, and the 4th and final book is coming out in December. I then read an arc of Break the Fall by Jennifer Iacopelli, I think is her name. I also gave this book 4 stars. It was really a month of 4 stars for me. This follows a girl called Audrey who does gymnastics, and gymnastics is her life, and she is going to the Olympics to compete for the USA. And basically the gymnastics world gets rocked when one of her teammates comes forward to accuse their coach of sexual assault. And basically it follows Audrey and the girls in her team as they kind of have to adapt to this new knowledge, to changing coaches and all that kind of stuff, and preparing for the Olympics and the pressure of that. And also Audrey suffers from chronic pain in her back from an injury. I really liked that representation because it's just not seen that often, and as a chronic pain sufferer myself, obviously I'm not doing gymnastics, I'm stuck in bed, but it was still just nice to see that little part of me represented, even if she was a gymnast at the Olympics. But it was such an empowering and heartbreaking and beautiful novel about sexual assault and kind of the power of girls coming together, and yeah, it made me cry. I loved it. It was just great. It was off to a bit of a slow start, and like there were some bits that didn't keep me quite captivated enough to get it to 5 stars, but if you're looking for a book that discusses those themes, this is definitely a fantastic one. I then read A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett, which is like a children's classic. It follows Sarah as she's sent to this boarding school by her father. She used to live in India, and her father sends her to this English boarding school, and she's like super rich and she gets her own room, and she's like really nice to everyone, but she's very, very rich. And then one day her father dies and she is left with no money and has to become a like servant basically. And yeah, it's a really lovely children's classic. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I gave this book 4 stars as well, I think. It's definitely one of my favourite children's classics. I mean, no ill child gets magically cured like in The Secret Garden or Heidi, so we're already off to a good start. But it's just a really sweet and comforting book that's full of like friendship and hope, and it's just lovely. And yeah, it's really good. I then watched the movie adaptation from like the 90s and I hated it because it was so like not like the book at all, and it made me mad because I really enjoyed the book and then the movie was so different. I hated it. I then read A Torch Against the Night by Sabaa Tahir, which is the second book in an Ember in the Ashes series. I won't go into detail because I don't want to give anyone any spoilers, but this is probably my least favourite book in the series. I gave it 4 stars, but it's just not as interesting as the other ones, I don't think. Still amazing, just not my favourite. I then read an arc of What Stars Are Made Of by Sarah Allen. This is a middle grade novel about a girl with Turner syndrome, which she was born with, and she is obsessed with this scientist from the early 1900s, Cecilia Payne, and she was the first woman to discover what stars are made of, but she was told her work was wrong, and then a man published her same work a few years after she discovered it. So she's been left out of textbooks, and Libby is really decided on trying to get Cecilia into the textbooks, and also her sister is having a baby and she wants to win this prize for this science competition so that she can help out her sister with her baby and stuff. It's just a really sweet novel about family and friendship and doing what you love and having people acknowledge your disability without having them judge you on it, and it's just so beautiful. I gave it 5 stars. It was one of the best books I've read on having a syndrome or a disability or a chronic illness, whatever, something in that area. And it was just a really beautiful story that I think anyone can read and enjoy, and it just made me so happy and I just loved it. And if you liked wonder, then you should definitely read this book because it's incredible. It's also own voices, unlike wonder, so if you're trying to read more diversely, please pick this book up because there are not enough own voices, disabled stories, syndrome stories, chronic illness stories, and yeah, I just really want to support all the ones that are out there that are doing a fantastic job. I then read A Reaper at the Gates by Salvatore. This is the third book in the Ember and the Ashes series and my second favourite, and I am so ready for book 4. I just can't. I gave book 3 4.5 stars, and I'm gonna be crushed with book 4. Like literally, Saboteur here is just gonna like punch me in the throat with those emotions, and I'm so ready for it. I then read an arc of Love is for Losers by Wibke Brueggemann. I hope that's somewhere in the ballpark of how you pronounce that. This is a YA kind of coming of age story about a girl called Phoebe who's feeling quite abandoned at the start of this novel because her mum works for Medical International or something, where basically she's a doctor and she goes to wherever there's a crisis and needs health workers. So at the start of this book, she goes to Syria for 6 months in order to help the humanitarian crisis there, and her best friend has just got a boyfriend, so she's kind of ditched her, and so Phoebe is just feeling irritated and alone, and she has this really cool godmother who looks after her and is so quirky and fun, and she ends up volunteering at her godmother's charity shop, and she kind of like develops this friendship and this romance with a girl despite her insistence that love is for losers, and she kind of develops her own little family, and it's just a really good book. It's so funny. It's got so many great moments. Phoebe isn't necessarily a likeable character. I really enjoyed the development that happened to her character over the book, and it was just so much fun. I just didn't want to put it down because I had such a good time reading it. And if you read Diary of a Confused Feminist, which came out in February this year, and you enjoyed that book, then I would highly recommend Love is for Losers because it's got quite a similar vibe, although Love is for Losers is lighter because Diary of a Confused Feminist discusses like mental health and stuff like that, and Love is for Losers is pretty much all very light. And yeah, if you like Angus Thongs and Perfect Snogging or Sex Education on Netflix, then you will enjoy this book, and it was so great, and the female pining was so good. I loved it so much, and yeah, it was incredible. I then read Ramona Blue by Julie Murphy. I gave this book 4 stars. This is a story about Ramona who lives in a trailer park with her sister and her dad in a tiny like trailer thing, and she works like 3 jobs and is just trying to like make ends meet, and then her sister ends up getting pregnant, which pushes even more pressure onto her, and she identifies as a lesbian, and she breaks up with her girlfriend at the start of this book, and then one of her old best friends, her like childhood best friends, comes back into town, and she starts to realise she's having feelings for him, and it's just kind of her discovering her sexuality, struggling with having to decide who you are when you're a teenager. And there were so many brilliant discussions in this book. It had a really good friendship group. I really loved the characters the most. They were so fantastic, and yeah, it was just a really good book, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time reading it, even though I do feel it was a bit long, but it was just really great. And if you're looking for books where the main character is like bi or is kind of like discovering more about their sexuality and is kind of confused, if you're looking for that kind of rep, this is a really good book for that. I then read The Oracle Code by Mariaki Nijkamp. This is a book about the superhero Barbara Gordon, like reimagining her origin basically, and she gets into an accident and is in a wheelchair and gets sent to this kind of rehabilitation house where everything is not as it seems. But the best thing about this graphic novel was it was full of disabled people. Like, there were multiple disabled people. I know, how crazy is that? Like, you're lucky if you get someone with a cane in most books, but there were people in wheelchairs and on crutches, and it was so good. I loved it so much, and the story was so interesting, the artwork was fantastic, and all in all it was just really solid. I gave it 4 stars. I really loved it, and I'm so happy that a graphic novel exists out there with actual disabled people in it. It was good. I then read one of my favourite books of the year, and that was The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. This is a very weird book, but in the best way. I gave it 5 stars, hence it being one of my favourite books of the year. But this is an adult book that follows a man called Linus who works as a caseworker for the Department of Care of Magical Youth or something like that, and he is put on this highly classified assignment, and he is sent to live in one of these like orphanages for a month where he looks at the care of these magical children. And he goes to this house and there's like the Antichrist and a sprite and a gnome and this like blob thing called Chauncey who just wants to be a bellhop, and the man who looks after all of them, Arthur. And it's so wonderful. Like, he starts off as this kind of closed off like grumpy man, and then he realizes about love and family, how family doesn't have to be blood, and there are places where you can heal and learn and become yourself, and it's just the purest book ever. I loved it so much. It was written perfectly. I literally loved everything about it. It was just so good. Just read it. Like, I just promise you, just read it and you will love it. It was incredible. Like, it literally makes me so happy to think about it. Like, I literally just smile whenever I think about it. And I was so sad when I finished it because I was just like, no, I just want to stay with these characters for like 3 million books. Literally, I would read just like every minute of their day, of their life, because that's how much I love them. I then read Good Wives by Louisa May Alcott, and this has really made a final decision on the fact that I should just not read classic sequels because they just make me annoyed, because I loved Little Women so much, but I gave Good Wives 2 stars because I hated it. Little Women was so great. It was about 4 sisters with individuality and freedom and spirit and love for each other, and then Good Wives is about them trying to please men and their husbands who suck and losing all of their individuality. So love that for me. I hated it. If you love Little Women, don't read Good Wives, just ruins it. So that's how I feel about that. I then read Sometime After Midnight by Elle Phillips. This is supposed to be a Cinderella retelling between 2 boys, but it's really not much to do with Cinderella. It basically just follows these 2 boys who meet at a club, who like really hit it off, but then they realise that one of them is the heir to this massive record company and one is the son of a man who killed himself, and it could have been because of the record company. And so it follows them as they try and figure things out. There's talk of mental health, suicide, grief. There's a real main focus on music, making music, the production of music, the business side of music, which I found really interesting and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And yeah, it was fine. I gave it 3 stars. It was a sweet enough romance, but I just didn't really care that much, so it was just kind of average. I then sadly DNF'd Queen of Coin and Whispers by Helen Corcoran. I got an arc of this from the publisher and it makes me really sad that I DNF'd it, but I got 200 pages of the way through and it was like 400 pages and I just couldn't read it anymore, and it was so sad because it was one of my most anticipated releases of the year and I just didn't like it. It follows these 2 girls in this I mean, I guess it's technically fantasy because the world is made up, but there wasn't any magic. And one of the girls becomes the queen of this place, and one of the girls becomes her spy, and then they kind of fall in love with each other. But the problem was, one, I love political fantasies, but this was just talking about like the price of grain and stuff. Like, why would I care about that? That's not interesting in the slightest. And also, the like female romance had like no development. It was all tell and no show, and I just didn't care for them at all. I might pick it back up at some point if I need to, but it was just really disappointing, and yeah, I was really sad that I didn't like it. I then read Spell Hacker by M.K. England. This is a sci-fi fantasy genre book, and I gave it 3.5 stars. It was a really fun time. It follows a group of 4 friends, Remy, Diz, Jason and Anya, and they run this like side business where they siphon Maz, which is like the magical substance in this world, and like sell it basically. And one day they discover a new type of Maz and are basically thrust into this world of conspiracy and secrets, and they have to kind of pull off these crazy missions, and it's just a really really fun novel. It also has so many like diverse cast members, like it's just very casually queer, and Remy identifies as non-binary and they use they them pronouns, and they also have a chronic illness. It is from a magical reason, but it still presents as a chronic illness, which was also super fun, and I was really glad to see that representation in there. And there was just so many diverse characters. It was just so great, and it's just very casual, and there wasn't really any kind of discrimination, which was refreshing to read about. And yeah, it was really just a fun novel. If you're looking for kind of a sci-fi fantasy adventure with a cool group of friends, a diverse cast, then this is the book for you. It was great. I then read The Arrival of Someday by Jen Malone, and I still don't really know how I feel about this book. It follows our main character who has biliary atresia, which basically means at some point in her life she'll need a liver transplant, and she gets to that point when she becomes 18, and it kind of follows her grief cycle and like the denying part and the accepting and all that kind of stuff, and figuring out how it feels to know that you could potentially die if you don't get the transplant you need, and how it affects your family and friends and everything like that. And it wasn't necessarily a bad book, but it's not Own Voices, and I'm still not sure how I feel about non-Own Voices writers writing about how it feels to kind of have to think about your mortality at a young age, and to have to figure out your relationship with your family and friends, and the kind of guilt and burden you can carry from putting this on your family and friends, and all that kind of stuff, which I have to go through and I've gone through, and everything that comes with being ill. And I just don't know how I feel about someone writing that experience who hasn't experienced that. So I'm still unsure about how I feel about this book. If you have any thoughts on that, let me know down below, because I am still pondering whether I think it's okay or not. In my opinion, I just don't know. I haven't made up my mind yet. Because it was done tactfully, unlike Me Before You, which was a non-Own Voices story about a disabled person, which was just god awful. This book was done well, but I still don't know how I feel about it not being an Own Voices novel. So, dunno. On my rating, don't know. And the final book I read was Clockwork Angel by Cassandra Clare. This was a reread. I read it when I was 16, so 4 years ago, and I just kind of wanted to see if I still liked it as much as I thought I did when I was 16. Because I gave the first book 4 stars when I was 16 and the second two 5 stars. Looking back, I thought that I was just too generous and I didn't really actually like it, and I just had no critical reading skills. But this book is actually still really good. I still gave it 4 stars, and I'm shocked because I hate the Mortal Instruments with a burning passion. I do love The Red Scrolls of Magic. It was one of my favourite books of last year. And I'm really glad to say that I enjoyed Clockwork Angel. I think the reason I thought I didn't like it is because I really don't like the romance. And that's... I just am going to have to overlook that. Because I love the plot. I love the setting. It's set in the 1800s. Did I even talk about what this is about? You all know what it's about. And I love the plot. I love the setting. I love the characters. And although I really dislike the romance, I'm still going to continue on with the series because I can just ignore the romance. Like, I don't like hate it, I just really don't enjoy it. So yeah, I still really enjoyed this book, and I think the reason I thought I didn't was because I really don't like the romance. It's too insta-lovey, like literally they'd know each other for days before they're like, wow, I would like die for them. And it's a love triangle, and I think one of them is clearly superior. Jem Carstairs can do no wrong in my eyes. He is an angel. I would lay my life down for him. I love him so much. Will sucks. I know everyone's in love with him, but you're all basic, okay? He sucks. And Tess is so bland. Like, why do they love her so much? Like, why are they obsessed with her? She's just... I think it's just because she's there. Like, honestly, that's the only reason I can see why they're, like, both in love with her. She's just there. And I just hate the romance. It just has no development. It irritates the hell out of me. It clearly should have ended with them all being in love with each other. I know how it ends. It doesn't end with them all being in love with each other. Not that that's really a spoiler, because who expected Cassandra Clare to do that? No one. But despite that, I still really enjoyed the book, and I'm really looking forward to reading the rest of the series. So, yes, those are all the books I read in March. Sorry if this was super long. I tried to make it as quick as I could. And yeah, I read some fantastic books, I read some not so fantastic books, but overall I'm very pleased with my reading month. And yeah, I am currently in the middle of an arc of Dangerous Remedy, which I'm loving, so I can't wait to talk about that in my April wrap up. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. Please follow me on Goodreads, Twitter and Instagram. I've posted full reviews for all of these books on Goodreads, so if you want to know any more of my thoughts, they are all on my Goodreads, and I post a bookstore around picture every day, and I'm on Twitter sometimes. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you're safe and well and not going too crazy in your home, and I hope that this brings a bit of distraction to anyone who enjoys my content. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!